Welcome to the StrongTeams.com podcast, where we help leaders build strong teams. Teams built on empathy, understanding, and trust, where every team member feels valued and contributes at the highest level possible.
Welcome to the StrongTeams.com podcast. My name is Steve Neesmith.
And I'm Rodney Cox.
And Rodney, our guest today is pastor, author, and blogger Ron Edmondson. For over 35 years, Ron has served in senior leadership roles, and for over 20 years as a consultant and coach. He's helped thousands of leaders and organizations. Ron served as CEO of the Leadership Network and currently serves as lead pastor for the second time, I might say, at the historic Immanuel Baptist Church in Lexington, Kentucky. Finally, and last but not least, the Ron Edmondson Leadership Blog was ranked in 2021 as a top 6 leadership blog. Ron, thank you for joining us today on the StrongTeams.com podcast.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate the interview.
Yeah, let me add my welcome too, Ron. I'm so grateful that you've joined us on the podcast here today. I can't wait to introduce you to our audience for those that don't know you, and for you to transfer your wisdom and understanding to our audience so that they might lead more effectively.
Well, I probably need to be listening to them. I'm still learning, so I have a lot to learn.
We all are. You know, we kind of talked about blooming before we started our recording here, and we're all still blooming. That's for sure.
That's right. That's right.
When we think we've stopped growing, right? That ought to be the biggest red flag as a leader. So
yeah, I've got a good friend, Jim Shepard, that told me recently. He said, you know, when I was in my 20s, I thought I was the smartest person in the room. In my 30s, I thought there were a few people around me almost as smart. In my 40s, I thought I was. Some people might be smarter than me. In my 50s, I was like, "What? Why did they invite me to this meeting?" So I'm in my 50s, late 50s.
Right. You and I are the same age then, late 50s for me too. And I feel the same way. I'm like, what am I doing in this room? Lord, help me contribute something, please. And
that's right.
And help me glean all that I should. You know?
Absolutely.
You know, as we get started, I always like to start on a personal note. So I'd like to talk a little about kind of your personal background. You know, how did you get it started in ministry? How did you become the CEO of Leadership Network? And obviously, how did you get to the lead pastor role of Immanuel Baptist Church?
Yeah, well, everything is a longer story than your podcast will allow, or that people would sit still long enough to listen to. But I grew up Christian home, went in the business world, started working when I was 12 full time. And so I've worked many, many years, but worked in my first leadership position was at the age of 19. And just really felt I had a calling to the business world, and did some political stuff, elected office, did radio broadcast for a long time, just did a lot of different things, very active in the community. And about 38 years of age, in a pretty dramatic turn of events, God called me into vocational ministry. I think we're all in ministry, and I said that for many years, but I was called into vocational ministry. So whatever I do has to be, for the kingdom. And I wish I'd had that understanding when I was in the business world. I probably would have led differently then too, but have done a lot of different things in the 21 years in vocational ministry with, we've revitalized 4 churches. We planted 2 churches, and part of the revitalization was coming to Immanuel Baptist Church that had 100-year history, but had fallen on really hard times. And we were able to see God kind of turn that around and we left on a very great season. And I was called I felt like it was a God opportunity to go to Leadership Network, which is an organization that I had been a part of, and went and did that for a season and learned a ton. And then through just really a lot of strange turn of events, COVID involved as well, I ended up the same church I'd pastored reaching back out to me and saying, "Hey, would you come pastor us again?" And so here we are. Didn't see it coming, didn't even want it, to be honest. Most of my calls in the vocational ministry have been reluctant calls. not things we wanted to do right away, not what we were looking for, but yet what God had for us. And so that's the way this started. And we came back here, been about, as this is recorded, about 9 or 10 months back as lead pastor after having served here 6 years and gone 4 years. And I came with a whole different kind of mindset in terms of, first time was to turn the church around. Second time was to take it to whatever next level there is. And so that's kind of the posture we're leading with. And you don't get many opportunities to do something the second time over again. And that's just kind of where we're at. And so I don't want to mess it up. And so here we are.
Yeah, I love to hear that humility. I don't want to mess it up, right? So God, order our steps. Tell us what the next step is, right? That's so important. Your title is lead pastor. Tell me a little bit about the difference in our audience, the difference between a lead pastor and a senior pastor from your point of view.
Well, it's really just terminology more than anything. It's really the same role. Probably a little pride there in the fact that I was senior pastor when I was called, changed it to lead pastor because I didn't feel old enough to have the title senior pastor. We have a senior pastor, senior adult pastor, and I'm not there yet. So it was really a matter of confusion of what my role was and who I was focusing on. And again, we do have, when I came the first time in 2012, this church had 60% senior citizens, which is not always a good statistic. And so we recruited a full-time senior adult pastor, and he was a pastor of a sister church in a nearby community and was a great blessing to me, 15 years ahead of me in life and in ministry. And I said I hired my own pastor. I hired a mentor in the building, and so but he was senior adult pastor, and we really tried to separate those two. So it was really just a matter of saying I'm the lead pastor. We have a senior adult pastor. That's Dan. And now we have somebody else.
Yeah, that's great clarification, and I could see why, for clarity purposes, you definitely want to create a title that wasn't confusing and makes a lot of sense. I think titles are way overrated, right? Like, I'm a pastor.
Too. I always let people make up their own. Right. Say, what do you want to call yourself? I'm fine with that.
I'm a pastor, right? And so that's what I am at heart, a shepherd. And so, Ron, you mentioned, and Steve mentioned in the introduction, that you served a stint as a CEO of the Leadership Network. And for our listeners that are unfamiliar with what the Leadership Network is, can you tell us a little bit more about that and help us understand how Leadership Network serves the church?
Yeah, it's a great organization. It's really birthed out of a man named Bob Buford's heart. Bob Buford was a early tech person, communications, television person, cashed out, made his fortune, and was mentored by Peter Drucker, who said, find where you're going to invest the rest of your life. He wrote a book called Halftime, which was to help people focus on their next season of life. And his halftime was Leadership Network. And at the time, about 30 years ago, the church was in a state of real change in that it was the rise of the mega church, and there were a lot of large churches that had pastors who were skilled in the pulpit, perhaps, and biblically trained, but not trained in leadership, not trained in how to lead these massive organizations. Seminary doesn't necessarily train for that. And so he helped equip senior pastors and then eventually executive pastors in different levels within the church to see around the corner, to lead these large organizations. So it was heavy on research, heavy on equipping that senior pastor for what they don't know. And that morphed over the years from leadership to, we were dealing with things like big data. And I was really working with the integration of faith and work and multi-site movement. A lot of those movements launched out of efforts that Leadership Network provided. Great hidden gem of an organization. And yet Bob Buford had one saying, it's about a 35-year-old organization, but he had one saying, my fruit grows on other people's trees. and which is a very humble position. But when I took over as CEO, it doesn't market very well if you can't tell what you're doing and what you've done, And so part of our was trying to retell the story and reposition the organization post Bob. Bob passed away about a few months before I came, and he had fully funded the organization for many years, and we just had to figure out a different model, a different business model, and so, but it's still a great organization. COVID produced a difficult time for the organization, for the ministry. And so some of the things that we were working on sped that up, and Leadership Network recently merged within the last year or so with a ministry called Exponential that Bob was also at the heart of starting. Both of those had his DNA in them, so it made sense to bring those two together. And so their best days are here. It's a lot more nimble organization than it was when I went there, which needed to happen. We had to resize the organization, but they're doing great things. In fact, they're doing a cohort, because it was a very cohort-based ministry, on digital church, kind of helping the church experience kind of what you're doing, podcasts and those sort of things. And I'm probably going to sign up for it just because I see the value in what Leadership Network brings to large churches, helping us learn to scale in new areas. So it's a great organization.
With over 20 years of coaching leaders and being in the leadership space and a leader yourself, you make a statement that everything rises and falls on leadership. And I'd like for you to expound on the word everything. Does everything really rise and fall on leadership? Unpack that for our listeners.
Yeah, actually, there was a mentor of mine. I don't know where he heard it the first time. I just talked to him this week. He's 86 and he's still dreaming big dreams, but he was the one that would just say that all the time. And again, he didn't make that up. But so I don't know where the term came from. But, when you say everything rises and falls on leadership, the world functions with leaders. It just does. God designed a system where Adam and Eve were the first leaders of this. Here's this earth, subdue it, name the animals, set up order. So we are a people that look for leadership. That's a God ordained structure of how we work as a society. You put 6 people in a room and you may call it a team, but somebody's going to look to somebody to take some leadership role in there, or nothing's going to happen. We were just in a meeting yesterday, and it's a meeting we have all the time. And an idea came to the table and everybody agreed to it. But I just spoke, and I was kind of in the back of the room, but I just kind of spoke and said, okay, who's taking charge of this? So that we know in 3 months, we can look back and say we accomplished this. Otherwise, you're just spinning wheels and you're wasting time. So, it's probably a bold statement to say everything rises and falls on leadership. I'm going to go to the store this afternoon and pick up stuff for supper. I don't know who's leading in that. My wife has some opinions. I have some, but at the end of the day, to get somewhere in this society, we are a society that's based and birthed on the function of leadership within that.
I couldn't agree more, Ron and Rodney. It reminds me of something I've said to the teams I've led over the years when I'm kind of establishing that early rapport with my teams. I always remind them, or I tell them, I say, listen, it's always the leader's fault. It always stops with me. And if we need more clarity, if somebody's, not meeting expectations, then that always comes back to me, the leader, that I haven't trained well, I haven't managed expectations well, I haven't communicated well. And I know that's just kind of one subset of what you're saying there, but wholeheartedly agree with what you're saying, that really leadership is important in everything.
Well, and today, in today's society, it's much more accepted. When I came into ministry, I'd always studied leadership. I have a master's in leadership and had, been involved in leadership at all kinds of levels in the marketplace and in the business world. And yet, when I brought those terms into the church, I got brutally crucified for it. Where is that in the Bible, and what, all those sort of things. And so use the word shepherd if you want. Okay, you can interchange that, because sheep need a shepherd. They need somebody to help them get to where to take the Psalm, the 23rd Psalm. They need somebody to help them find good water and good grass, and take them somewhere they can't go on their own, and protect them from the. So leadership, call it shepherding if you want to if you want to put a biblical word around it. But leadership is throughout the scriptures. It would be very difficult to deny Moses was a leader. David was a leader. Noah was a leader. Jesus certainly is the best example of that.
Amen. Amen. Ron, I've lost track of how many books you've written. I'm thinking it's around a dozen or so. And one of my favorites is Mythical Leader. And in that book, you explore some of the common misunderstandings of exactly what leadership is, which is, may sound really basic to our listeners, but is so key. Can you unpack a little bit of that for our listeners, what you mean when you talk about kind of the misunderstandings of what leadership is and how you need to overcome those as a leader?
Yeah, so I just picked 7, I call them myths that, and I had written that as a blog post when a publisher approached me and said, hey, I think there's a book in there. And so they were just 7 very simple principles that I think are misnomers, if you will, in leadership. And one, the one that's most prevalent for me is introverts can't, you've got to be an extroverted loudmouth to be a leader, or, at least out of the box kind of person, very talkative. And yet some of the leaders of largest organizations I know are actually introverts. And I happen to be one. And so on Sunday, I'll be the most extroverted person in the room, but I have to have downtime. I have to have time alone. I'm not the life of the party all the time, so to speak. I'm married to an extrovert, and I'm glad she is, because she comes to church and that fuels her to hug people and love on people. It drains me, even though I know it's a necessary part of being a shepherd. But I'm an introvert at heart, and probably on the scale, further scale, I'm not even mildly introverted. I'm deeply introverted. My son is a senior pastor as well, and a lead pastor, and he's introverted as well, and probably even more than I am. And so I've had to coach him through that as well. It's very relieving to me, and I have had that for other pastors who are this way, that you can still lead, and you can even lead in a large context and be who you are. Another one is similar along that. We're all different. And so you can't lead everyone the same way, just as you can't parent 2 children the same way. You need different, some respond to different types of discipline and different types of structure. People on the team are the same way. You have to know your people and what they need to be led well. And then I'll share a third one is you don't need a title to be a leader. We talked about titles earlier. I'm not a big fan of titles, but you don't have to wait till you have a position. If someone says, I really feel called to lead, well, go lead something. Show us. Just see where people need to go and they can't seem to get there, and help them out, help them get there. That's what leaders do. And so, that book was kind of an explosion of thoughts that I had throughout my leadership career. And I wrote it in the mind of, if you're a young leader, I just want to help you get some basic grounding in leadership of what many things I had to learn the hard way. And I want to help you learn from my mistakes.
Speaking of young leaders, Ron, tell us a little bit about, if you can recall, maybe one or two of your biggest misunderstandings or learning curves you experienced as a young leader, learning how to lead well, while going, on the job, if you will.
Well, I would say one of them is I only know what I know, and I don't know any more than that. There is, and people only know what they know. I think there's this expectation when somebody comes into a leadership position that suddenly they're going to have the answers. They're the person that has this figured out. They know where to go. They know the right decision to make. I tell young leaders all the time, I've seldom been 100% certain. Many times I have to make a decision, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to do my homework. I'm going to check with advisors. I'm going to do everything I know to do to vet the decision. But then at the end of the day, you just have to make a decision. And I've just seldom been 100% certain on that. That comes with hiring someone or firing someone or going in a new direction, or, I'm doing the best I know how. But that understanding is huge for me because it takes the pressure off of trying to have all the answers, or trying to be that person. So I'll often show up. That's why I talked about a meeting we had yesterday. I was sitting in the back of the room because I don't have the best answers in most meetings. And so I want to hear from other people. I want their thoughts to be heard. And so I ask lots of questions. I share a lot, of over communicate. And the biggest thing is I let people ask me questions. And I've served with some leaders in the past, especially, that you just didn't ask. You just kept your head down. I actually worked. I worked for a leader, and I wrote on the top of my page every time I went into a meeting, "Keep thy mouth shut," because you did not want to have an opinion, and that's a hard place to live very long, and I wouldn't recommend it that you do it very long. But I just want to create an environment where people feel free to ask me anything they don't know.
Commitment comes in two forms. One's a transactional commitment. I hired you, you work for me, you execute on my mission. And that always leads to just transactional activity at best.
Get what you pay for.
That's right.
Yeah.
And what you want is commitment where the big idea is at hand. And that's where the idea is bigger than anyone in the room. And it's in that collective space of wisdom that we pursue God hard and with all of our heart, soul, and mind. And we see great things happen. In fact, maybe even the greater things that Jesus spoke about. But it takes a humble leader to do that. And I know our audience will be refreshed. I know I'm refreshed, and Stephen is, just to hear the humility that you exhibit in our time together and the sober judgment that you have about yourself and what you bring to the table. And we think that's one of the greatest leadership qualities that a leader can possess. And there is no greater asset that a leader could have is the relational capital that they have with the people they lead. Mm-hmm. And without relationship, what do we have to cover the multitude of our mistakes? And we have to have strong relational capital. And so I'm sure that you have strong relational capital with the 40 or so employees that you lead there at Immanuel. And I'd like to really talk about that for a minute. We're the Strong Teams podcast. We probably ought to talk about building strong teams as well as leaders. So can you tell me, some of the things that you do to gather your staff, help grow your staff, and serve your staff in the space of building strong teams?
Yeah, and we have about 100 employees total. We have about 40 or so listed on the website, but we have a fitness center. We have a childhood program. So we have a lot of people that we're responsible for. We used to have a preschool before. I got a Christian school to take that over because I felt the weight of that many people on our team. But I think the number one thing that I try to instill in every organization that I'm leading is trust. Trust of me, trust of each other. I do something every time I start a new job as the leader, and it's gotten me in trouble before. And but I'm going to keep doing it, and that is, I give instant trust. And so I will say to them, look, I've come I'm going to trust you. I'm just going to go ahead and say that I trust that you're here because you want to be. You're going to do what you need to do. That I don't have to micromanage you. I'm going to give you instant trust. You'll have to earn my mistrust. But I'm asking you to trust me likewise. Now, I realize some people don't give trust as fast as I do. That's okay. I'll try to earn that over time. But the sooner we trust each other, the sooner we can have fun together. And I say that every single time. So building that trust is so incredibly important. And there's so many things, obviously, that we do to build that and protect that. But, I have to do what I say I'm going to do. I have to follow through on what I say I'm going to do. I met with a young couple this morning, and I can't say a lot about the conversation other than that they're going through kind of a rediscovery of themselves of what, are they going to, one of them's on staff, are they going to stay on staff and that sort of thing. And I said, I want to know that. I want to be an organization that's strong enough that if you come to me and say, I don't want to work here in 2 years, help me get where I want to go in 2 years, that I'm a safe place to do that, even as the lead pastor. You know, I was asked one time in a conference, how do you know you're on a healthy team? Well, you just kind of know, if you're in a healthy marriage. You just kind of, if your marriage is not healthy, right? And it's that way in all relationships. And so, but example wise, we had a worship pastor that another larger church was trying to hire them away. And that pastor knew me and called me and said, hey, I just feel like I need to let you know we're having some serious conversations. And I said, well, the good news is I already know that, because he's already come and told me that. And had that with another position of, and they talk themselves out and stay because they don't want to give up what they have. But so knowing that I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do, I'm going to follow through on it. I'm not going to be easily offended when I hear, another person told me recently, I just don't love what I'm doing. Okay, well, let's get through that and figure out why you don't. Is it a fit problem? Is it personal? Is it me? Is it whatever it is? Let's figure that out. And if it's helping you get to where you want to go, I'm okay with that too. But I can't, we said earlier, people, you only know what you know. I can't help you if I don't know that. And so I want to build that kind of rapport and that kind of relationship that is heavily built upon trust. And then we can, we have shared values and shared resources. We can just all dig in together and accomplish the mission. But I don't want to work somewhere where I go home, and where I go home at the end of the day and I feel beat up. One of the things that I say is you can tell, and we've all had these, all three of us have had these, where I tell our boards, our committees and that sort, our leadership, look, I know if it's a healthy relationship when you call and I see you on my caller ID and something doesn't get nervous inside my stomach, and that I'm okay taking your call because I know it's not going to be a bad call. And so I want our team to feel that way, that if I call them, this is not going to be bad. Ron just needs something, That's all built on trust, and that takes time and that takes experience to gather in doing what you say you're going to do.
And even if I do need correction and that call comes, it comes with gentleness, right?
Absolutely.
And it comes with a true love of you and helping you move from one place to another. And it
doesn't come 6 months later. The worst thing is for you to use the evaluation process to beat you up. And I was in that job, and every time I met with my superior, I knew I was in trouble about something.
Yeah.
I always tell our people, you will never be surprised. Mm-hmm. When you get to an evaluation, you'll never be surprised. When we have because I'm going to let you know if I have a problem with you today. I may let you know tomorrow because I may want to think about it, how I want to handle it. But I'm not going to go very long before look, we got something we got to talk about.
Mm-hmm. I love that trust approach, Ron. I'm going to steal a line from Rodney Cox here and say to our listeners right now that if you don't remember anything else from this podcast, I want you to pause right here in the middle of my sentence, and I want you to rewind to 5 minutes ago and listen to everything that Ron just said about the trust approach to leadership, and specifically rewind again and listen to the scenarios that he described on how he deals with team members and team members that come to him and talk about how they're not sure they want to be with the organization in a couple of years. Ron didn't throw them out the door. Ron treated them with respect, and he led them in a way so that they can be successful even beyond the season that they're in. And I just think that is an excellent approach to leadership, and I commend you for that. And I really appreciate you going into detail on that and providing examples and illustrations. Ron, you're at a place now where you're serving as a consultant and coach at times, and you're giving out advice and prescribing solutions to people. But what's some of the best leadership advice that you've gotten, Ron, from maybe a mentor or a fellow leader over the years?
Well, I've always had mentors, and so there just is a ton. And I always say to young leaders, always take something to write on. It's even better if it's not your phone. And if it is your phone, let them know that you're taking notes in your phone. But have something to record, because those nuggets of wisdom are all around us, and people are constantly sharing them. But one of the things that comes to mind is people don't always think like me or even agree with me, and that's okay. That's part of being a leader. I think probably early in my leadership career, I felt like I had to get these people that were so aligned with, this is the right way to do something, that it was not effective. And I don't remember the instance, but I remember learning over the years that it's okay to have different opinions in the room. That's okay. That's actually better. I think about my wife and I, we're total opposites. And yet we make a stronger team when we pull from each other's differences. And so it's okay to be different and to have different opinions from the people you're trying to lead. That's actually can be a very helpful thing.
Ron, you've been reading our mail now, right? That's our narrative and what we've been preaching for 22 years as well, and strongly agree with that. What you have, I don't have. What I have, you don't have. And when those two things come together in a spirit of interdependence and trust and seeking to understand, we actually have more. It affords us so much more. And I just loved hearing your heart as well in your examples, and how you didn't take it as an indictment on your leadership acumen or ability or your vision or your values when somebody says, I'm not sure that God's calling me to stay here. And we take so many things personally. And I love a good friend of mine, Dr. Dale Tackett, and a lot of our listeners have heard this. He said, great leaders love and love well. But what we do is we misunderstand love. Love is the zealous, selfless seeking of another's true good. And if I'm selfless towards you and I'm zealful towards you and I truly want your true good, my goal isn't to hang on to you. My goal is to help you flourish wherever God places you. And if we lived out our lives like that in every relational sphere that as believers that we live in, I think the world would look really, really different, Ron.
Well, one of the things that I have done throughout my ministry, I think I did it in the business world a couple of times. The business world operates so much differently, but in the ministry world, where I often say bad people stay in the name of grace sometimes, because you'll have somebody that stays a long time and they've quit loving the job years ago. So one of the things that I've often done is bring somebody in and say, look, if they are not willing to come to me, and just say, look, I realize, and I tell every team, I say it several times throughout the year, never stay for a paycheck. Yep. I'm not going to stay for a paycheck. You don't stay for a paycheck. So I have often pulled somebody in, usually somebody I believe in, that they're just not a fit anymore. I can see it. Everybody can see it.
Right.
And so what I will often do, and I'll do it at the first of the year, I'll say, look, this is your year of discovery. So over the next year, you're going to figure out, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? But at the end of this year, you're not going to be in this position. Now, that doesn't mean something doesn't open up in the position, but let's say a student pastor, because I've done that with several student pastors that just feel like they're aging out of the role or whatever that is. Okay, you're afraid to take the next jump. I get that. It's comfortable here. I get that. But we really need a student pastor who's fully engaged in student ministry and wants to be a student pastor. So here's your year of discovery. Figure out what you want to do. I'll help you any way I can. But at the end of the year, I'm going to go look for a student pastor. And, that has so worked well. I've got several examples that are pastors now and loving that. They didn't love that conversation.
Right.
And they didn't love the process over the next few months of discernment, but it forced them out of the nest, so to speak. I love the illustration, the biblical illustration of the eagle and the eaglets. It forced them out of the nest a little bit. And I think even today I have great relationships with all of them. And then I've had a couple that have actually kind of reinvented themselves and stayed in the role, and that's okay too. but you can't stay in a miserable. I would not be true to who I've been called to be as the leader of this organization if I allowed you to stay there long.
Absolutely.
I love the when we get tactical and practical on this podcast, that's exactly what that was. At the same time, it was very loving. And I'll tell you, to our listeners out there, if you're brave enough to take an approach like that, and I have also been in an organization where, we've been able to communicate with a team member like that. I tell you, I'll give you some more advice. Give them time, quietly, discreetly, give them time to go out there and look around and interview if they need that. So they don't, even after that talk, they don't feel like they're having to sneak around, if you will, and have these conversations way off the grid. Let them know that you support that, and right. that you'll let them go do that. You're not going to make a big deal of that. It's just as long as their responsibilities are covered back home. But I appreciate that illustration, Ron.
Yeah, it's impossible to get healed if you hide, right? And so,
yeah, that's right.
So you can't hide. We can't create cultures where people feel like they need to hide. And the only way that we can thrive is when we're in the light and we're walking with one another, we're confessing to one another, and we're journeying with one another. And we've lost sight really how to do that at a team level in many instances. Ron,
yes.
Before we exit our time together, I always like to ask this closing question. And that is, what is the question that I should have asked or that you wish I would have asked that you'd really like to answer for our listeners?
Well, I think it goes back to something I'm dealing with in ministry every day. And that's, I know so many pastors that are burnt out, so many leaders that are burnt out, just falling out, and how do you stay in it for the long haul? I'm actually going to say this to our church Sunday. I just got back from over 2 weeks away, and that was a long season for me because I never take 2 weeks off in a row. I don't know that I ever have, but it's been a hard journey coming back. We're still coming out of COVID, so many things. So the only way I know to survive long term, because I've never been able to find balance. My life is seldom in balance. There's always seasons where I'm stretched more than I think I can do. The only way I know is to develop rhythms that are healthy, and to so I'm not afraid when we're at our busiest point, most stressful day ever, to stop at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon and go home.
So, Ron, tell our listeners how they might find you online.
Just the name Ron Edmondson. You can Google that and get to ronedmondson.com or to the Twitter or Facebook feed. It's just, I'm not because it's intentional, just because I've been online a long time. It's pretty easy to find. Google knows me well.
Yep, that's great. So rodedmondson.com, rodedmondson.com. If you want to learn more about Immanuel Baptist Church and the work they do as well, it's ibc.family and ibc.family. And Ron, let me just thank you for spending time with Stephen and I today. We're incredibly grateful. I know our listeners will be blessed, and we hope to have you back again soon.
That sounds great. Thank you.
You bet. Well, until we meet again, God bless.